you know, something is wrong with the way these numbers are adding up, you know, what is the reason for this? And I would start writing things, you know, and they were like, I never heard of them before. And I didn't know, I mean, because, you know, when you're talking or when you're writing a letter, dear so-and-so, I'm writing to inform you that I'll be coming to visit you on Tuesday next. You've got in your mind what you're going to put in this letter.
Right.
And you know what you're going to say, and it's just a question of putting it together. I mean, that's different from writing when you don't know what's coming, which is a kind of a unique thing. And then I would say, well, I have to go and take care of the children, or I have to go cook dinner or something, or I have to go do this or that, or whatever. So I would put it down, and it would like stop. But it would be like it was backing up in my head. And it would back up to the point where I felt it was like pressure. Like I was having a headache. Just, you know, just like a headache. And I'd say, you know, I've got to go, because some parts of it would leak out, you know, like words, you know, like, wait a minute, you know. And it just seemed like I was just thinking. Okay, now I'm supposed to be, you know, cooking here, but I'm really thinking about, you know, the relationship between the, you know, the magnetism of this planet to that planet, and you know, the solar radiation and gravity and planetary distances and you know, blah blah blah. You know, what do you think? And what do you think would happen if that happened? And you know, I was thinking about these things, and they would like leak out of my head.
So at some point you would go and have to.
So I had to stop and go write it down. And I have boxes full of this material.
Fascinating.
So
how did you make the transition then from doing
the
that?
problem was I didn't trust it as channeling. So, yeah.
Okay, so that's amazing.
So, you see, this is my most recent event.
I can't believe it.
This is a cast iron skillet. It was one of my favorites, belonged to my great-grandmother.
Amazing.
And it wasn't even hot when I looked at it. I had just, you know, it was there. And I was...
Were you upset at the moment?
Well, there were a lot of things going on, and there were a lot of things that I needed to get a handle on. You know, the universe and the subconscious mind is marvelously metaphorical. So this is a message to myself.
Okay.
Which is what most psychokinetic activity is, by the way. It's people sending messages to themselves. And, I mean, even a lot of poltergeist type activity, you know, but that's a whole other topic. Because, yeah, I've studied all that sort of thing.
Well, did it scare you when this happened?
No.
There had to be a loud noise, right?
Yeah, and there, everybody else was in the room, too.
Oh, really?
Well, yeah. I mean, Anna, you were there, weren't you?
Nobody heard about it right after I was in the office.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. There were 4 or 5 people in the kitchen when it happened, and we're all just standing there going.
Uh-huh.
And then I went, and then I turned around and I said, "All right, who's pissing me off?"
Incredible. Okay. Have you ever hurt yourself?
No.
Never. And what about hurting other people?
No.
Have you? No.
No.
Just kind
No,
of
I
assign
send messages
yourself.
to myself,
Right. I understand.
and usually it's pretty clear what the message is. One of my favorite ones was I have a bust of Edward VII that my grandparents acquired prior to the coronation that never happened because he abdicated to marry Wallis Simpson. But they had acquired this as a souvenir, and it was something that I acquired when my grandparents died. But anyhow, so I've got this bust of Edward VII, and he's sitting up on top of a bookcase, and my youngest daughter came in. I was reading a book, and I was reading about, Templars, and she came in with a piece of gold foil paper and said, "Mommy, can you cut me out a crown to wear?" And I said, "Sure." I put my book down and I got the scissors and I sat there and I cut her out a crown and taped it so she could wear this crown on her head. And as soon as I handed it to her, all of a sudden Edward VII came tumbling off the shelf broke into pieces, dented my my end table, and then I turned the page, and after all of this was cleaned up, and I was very upset about it because there was no ostensible reason for Edward to come tumbling off the shelf. But then I turned the page, and there's in the book that I was reading, they were reciting the old nursery rhyme about Jack and Jill went up the hill, and how this had come about as it had described, certain, some royal battles or something. Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water. Jack came down, fell down and broke his crown.
Right.
And here I had just made a crown. Edward VII, who never was crowned, fell off the shelf, and I turned the page and read about, Jack breaking his crown. So I never figured out what the message of that one was, but that was one of those really weird things, that just happens to me.
Well, are you familiar with your prior lives?
Most of them, yeah.
Okay. And do you think that you were king at any point?
No.
You don't?
No. No, I don't think it would have anything to do with that. No. Oh, God, I wouldn't want to be a king. No, but in my immediate past life, I was just a German housewife in Nazi Germany, married to a Jew, and the Nazis came and took my husband and my children, and I committed suicide. So I did fall down and break my crown.
So at this point, we are at this point where you are putting two and two together. You've meditated, you've got contact in essence with the seas, although you don't actually know it's the seas.
Well, you have to understand that during these meditative experiences, or during meditation, I would tend to, some people call it samadhi, when you're just kind of like gone, and you're just gone for extended periods of time. So I guess if that's what you want to call it, that's what was happening, and I would be gone for extended periods of time. And, what was going on inside my head was not something that was foreign or different. It was essentially myself in the future. It was just, a wider scope of consciousness. So when people talk about the seas, it always entertains me because they're saying, oh, I'm in touch with the seas, and I'm thinking to myself, well, I didn't remember, talking to you lately, because it's basically as they have said, and as it has proven to be, through the years, it's just a really highly expanded state of consciousness that expands into the future and the past, and laterally, I suppose, because, if you're members of a soul group, certainly there would be other individuals on the planet who might be, part of the sea's soul group. So it's not like a singular thing, but I would say that it's not all-inclusive of all of humanity either.
And that makes sense.
But it never was an intrusive thing. It never felt like anything other than the action of my own brain working through a problem. And in fact, there have been many times when I was, like in school, when I would be working, like for example, on mathematics. And, when you work very hard on a math problem, how you feel this pressure right here, you've got stuff going on in this forward part of your brain. And that's in a sense how it felt. It felt like my brain was applying, kind of something like sheer brute thinking power on a problem, sorting it out. That's how it felt. Maybe that's what it is.
Okay. So at that point, though, I'm just kind of putting myself back where you were at that point, because you went from that place to actually using the Ouija board, and I'd like you to describe.
Well, there was a lot of water over the dam and under the bridge between then and then, because 1985, there was a good 7 more years of studying and researching a lot of things before I began the experiment that led to, that other form of communication with the seas. There was a lot of experimentation in many things. Hypnotherapy. I was doing exorcisms. A a lot of studying, a lot of research, trying to find out what was, and of course I became kind of obsessed with the material that had come through my own head. And I wrote it down. I wrote this manuscript that I call the Noah Syndrome, because everything kind of focused on the idea of that formulated in my brain of quantum metamorphosis on a macrocosmic scale. Because it seemed to me that this was the central idea of the eschatological thesis. And I began to research to see if this was actually, something that was possible. And I did a lot of studying and reading in quantum physics, and certainly not as a professional in any respect. And following up all the trails and all the clues that I had put together in this manuscript to see if any of it was even remotely possible, because the scenario that presented itself in these thoughts, shall we call them, that I was having, was pretty horrendous, which was that, yes, the planet does transform, but a transformation of the planet is essentially, to us at our level, a cataclysmic event. Because if you say, if an atom goes through a quantum leap transformation, or acquires electrons or loses electrons or whatever, changes from one state to another, or maybe from one element to another by the acquisition or the losing of some particle or some part of it. At that level, it's got to be cataclysmic for that atom. And if you think of the solar system as a giant atom, and I know that's frowned on by certain mainstream scientific thinking, but I still think that it's a useful metaphor. But if you're thinking about a solar system going through a quantum transformation to become something else, alchemically speaking, it's going to be cataclysmic. It can't be otherwise. And cataclysm on that level does not bode well for humanity. And I began to think that this is what these dreams, these things that I had seen, is that they were pointing to this cataclysmic transformation. So of course, if you're thinking about a cataclysmic transformation of your world, the first thing you're going to think about is, oh my God, where's Noah in the ark when you need him? And that concept of Noah and his ark captured my attention, because all of these stories of former cataclysms that you can possibly relate to transformations in the state of the world, such as the fall from Eden, other cataclysmic transformations, they were probably, other transformations were undoubtedly cataclysmic. And if you read the science, study the geology, the archaeology, the paleontology, you realize that these cataclysms have occurred repeatedly on this planet. And we don't know with each one of these cataclysms what life was like for the beings that occupied the planet. For example, a solar system that exists in a different cosmic ray environment could be very different from the solar system or the Earth or reality as we experience it now.
Okay, let me ask you this though. At this point, because we're kind of following a chronology here, and you're going through an experience, your mind is opening up to all these aspects, and you're thinking about them. And obviously, you're now encountering, like you're putting two and two together, and you're getting the notion of a cataclysm and something coming on in the future of the world. You're looking at,
and
I don't know, are you concentrating on 2012 at all, or are you
well,
just
I
looking
wasn't
all over the place?
At this point, come on, this is 1985.
Okay.
86, was anybody really talking about 2012 then? Maybe a few French people, but it wasn't like, anybody was talking about it.
Okay.